Hey everybody, in today's video I'll be going over how to create a SQLite database using the EntityFrameworkCore by Microsoft. So you might be wondering what the difference between SQL and JSON is, and SQL is really great for holding large repetitive lists of data. For example, if you have a list of people, you're not really you're not really having any change in data, you're just saving people. So it's great to hold those very large lists of people, and JSON is really for non-repetitive things. For example, the settings in your program. Anyways, we'll be going over all of this in this video. So I'm really excited to show you all that, and we'll be creating a student database. So I'm gonna open up Visual Studio. So once you get into Visual Studio, you're just gonna want to create a new project. All right, so then once you get to the templates, I'll just be creating a console application, but you really can be following any template you'd like. Go here, I'm just gonna go with console app 1, whatever. I don't really care. Create the project. Wait for this to load. All right. Now you got your Visual Studio open. We can just delete this. We don't really need this code. And we can go ahead and create a new class. And we'll call this class Database Model. And basically, what this class will do is it will store the model for our database. So before we go ahead and start designing our model, we will also need some extensions, not extensions, some packages, and we can get those from the NuGet package manager. So you can just go to Tools, go down to NuGet Package Manager and click Manage NuGet Packages for this solution. So I'll show you what you'll need to install. You can just look up EntityFrameworkCore. Then right here, we'll need this one. We'll want to install it on console app, which is this just the project name. So we'll want to install that. Give it a second to download. Then it's gonna have to download a whole bunch of dependencies, whatever. Just hit OK. Go through these. You have to accept their licenses. So go ahead, I accept. Cool, now we got that downloaded. Now we also want to get the EntityFramework.core.SQLite. And then we want to install that as well. Then we'll go through all this again. All right, hit OK. Once again, you'll have to accept the license. Hit I accept. Then everything will be downloaded. We can just close out of that. We can go back into our database model. So in here, we will want to use Microsoft, sorry, I spelled that right, .entityFramework.core. And what we'll be doing is we'll be creating this class from DB context, we'll be inheriting from DB context, which is short for database context. Basically, this will just gives our program the context for the database. Not really sure how else I can explain it. So then we will also want to create a constructor, database model, taking in 0 parameters, and we'll do database dot ensure created. So what this does is when we first create our database model, when we first create our database model, we want to make sure that the database is actually created. Otherwise, we can't access it. If it's not created, we want to ensure that it is. So even if we don't have any data yet, we want to ensure that it's already created. So then we're going to go down here and we're going to want to create a new class. So as I said earlier, we're going to be creating a database of students, and so we're going to create a new class called students where we can hold the information about each student. So what kind of information do we need? Well, I'm going to have a public ulong ID. Just get and set that. And basically, this will be the primary key for our database. What the primary key is, it's the unique number for each value in the list. It's almost like the index, but it's possible for there to be an item in the list that doesn't have an index. So, anyways, now each student will have a first name, right? Set that. Then each student will have a last name. Now, what other data might we want to hold? How about we say we can hold an int for their grade. And then how about we also hold a number of tardies and sorry, and a number for absences. I'm not quite sure if I spelled that right. Let me just go double check and see if I spelled that right. Excuse me, I did not spell that right. Should not be a C here. Anyways, so right here we have our class, and this class will hold all the data for each student. And then inside the database, we want to create a database set. So this will just hold a set of students. And then in here, we'll want to pass in student so that the database set knows that we're holding this kind of data. So now we've created a database set that holds students. Very simple. And then finally, the last part for our database model is we want to create a protected override void on configuring. And basically what this will do, it will override the original method it will override the original method inside of the DB context. And then here we'll specify the data source. We'll use SQLite and we'll specify where we want to access our data. So we'll just plug it in like this. And then here, this is just our connection string, right? As it says right here, you can see connection string. We want to tell it where we want to access the data. So where do I want to access the data? I want to access it in this folder inside of data, and we'll call the file, let's say students, students.db. Okay, there you go. So we'll save that. And now that we got all of this working, we can completely forget about this, at least for now. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new class. And I'm going to call this database service. And what this will do is this will talk to the database for us. So in here, we'll want to create multiple things to modify our database. So what I will be creating is I'll be creating a public static student add student command. I'll add in the parameters later. And yeah, okay. We'll just forget about that error for now. It's gonna bug me a little bit. Anyways, we'll have a public static student add student. Basically, what static means is that you don't need to create an instance of database service to run this command. So basically, without getting into too much detail, usually when it's not static, you have to create an instance of the object, and then you have to call that specific method inside that specific object. With this, there's one instance of this object, and I can always use the same method or the same object to call it. And I'll show you how that works later on when we're actually adding students. Anyways, let's move on. Let's move on to the other functions. So we also want to have a public static student remove student. And the reason why I'm making it return a student is so that we can have information about it when we're actually calling this. And I'll also add a return null so that it doesn't give me this error. And then we'll want to do a public static student public static student get student. And with that, we'll be able to just get a student so we can access, a specific student. Not that complex. And then finally, I'll also add on a public static student edit student because you have to be able to edit the grades and stuff like that. Okay, and we'll return null. Okay, so if we want to add a student, we'll first need to be able to access the database. So how we'll do this is we'll do using var context is equal to new database model. Basically what this will allow us to do is it will allow us to access the database through context. And before we're actually able to add a student, we need to know what student we want to add. So we'll take in student as a parameter and call it new student. So inside of here, it's pretty simple how it works now. Basically, I'll create a var entity, and I'll explain this in a second. And then context, very simply, works like this. We can access the variable students, which as you can remember, if we go back to database model, students is just the database set. And in here, this just works exactly like a list. So how it will work is we just do context.students.add, and then we'll put new student because that's what we want to add. Then in here, we'll set the entity dot state is equal to, and before we do that, I'm also going to implement using Microsoft dot entity, I spelled something wrong, dot EntityFrameworkCore, and right here, we'll do entity state dot added, and this will basically just tell our database we added something. And right here, we'll just do context dot save changes, and then right here, instead of returning null, and then we'll just return the new student. All right, so that's it for the add student. Sorry about that. All right, so now I'm going to be creating the remove student, and for this, what we'll be doing is, just like the one above, we'll be creating a new context with the database model, just like that, and we'll be taking in a ulong ID. Basically, what we'll do is we'll access the student through this ID, and we'll be able to find out, we'll be able to find it and then delete it. So right here, I'm going to do var result is equal to context dot students dot find and then ID. And basically, what this will do is it'll search through the students with the ID, and if it comes up with something, it will give us the student, and if it doesn't find anything with that ID, then it'll just return null. So if what we'll do is if the result is null, then we'll return null. And why we want to do this is because we don't want to try to remove something that's null. We want to handle this in case it is null. And so once we know that we've weeded out all the wrong IDs or whatever, we'll simply do var entity is equal to context dot students dot remove, and then we'll put in the results because now we know that the result isn't null, so we can remove it. And just like before, we'll also set the entity state, and we'll set it to deleted. Just like that. Once again, we have to save our changes. And then right down here, I will return the result in case we ever want to access it, ever access what we removed. All right, great. So now I'm going to be creating the getStudent function, and I think it's pretty self-explanatory how this is going to work now, but I'll still walk you through it. But if you can, I want you to pause the video and I want you to try to make this yourself. All right, so just like before, just like we've been doing, we'll be doing using var context is equal to new database model once again. Okay, great. And now, just like last time, what we'll be doing is we'll do context.students.find ID. Very simple, find the student, whatever. And then we can just, we actually don't even have to check. We don't even have to check if the student is null. Oops. And I'm getting an error here because I forgot to include the ID. And by the way, I forgot to mention this earlier, but the reason why we're using ulong is the same thing as a long, except it doesn't dedicate a bit to the sign integer. And what that means is the first bit of any number is used to define the sign of that number, and the sign is negative or positive, right? So if we do ulong, it will be able to be twice as high because it doesn't have negative numbers. I mean, it'll go twice as high. And we don't want to have to deal with negative numbers for IDs. We only want the positive numbers, and we want it to go up as far as possible. I think the number is really big. It's like I don't remember exactly how big, but it's way bigger than trillions. I don't remember what goes after that. It's like three more places after trillions or something like that. Anyways, it's not important right now. So now that we have the result, we just return the result, easy like that. If it's null, it'll return null, no big deal. Um, Now that we've created that, once again, this one's maybe a little less self-explanatory. But what we'll do is we'll take in a student, right? And then we'll do, sorry, forgot the using. Var context is equal to new database model. Once again. And then what we'll want to do to update this is once again create a new entity, and then we'll do context dot infraction. Oh, sorry. Context dot students dot update student. And you might be wondering how does the database know exactly what student to modify? And basically how it works is it uses the data I mean, the way this is going to work, the way we're going to use this is we're going to use the getStudent method to get the student. And then right in here, we're just going to be updating it. And it'll be able to tell from the information inside of the student variable which one it needs to update, which is very convenient for us. And just like everything else, we'll just do a nice context.save changes. Great. So now that we've got this entire database service working, we can now start looking into, we can now start looking into our program.cs and start using these new features that we've coded in, which is really cool. So I'm going to start by adding a couple students, and you guys can look at my code. You don't have to copy it. Now that you've got everything working, you're all set, really. But I'll be showing you how you can really use this and how it's really cool, and I'll also be showing you how this database works. Okay, so I'll start by adding a bunch of students, and you can do whatever you want, really. So I'm able to just do database.service.add student, just like that. And we'll create a new student. Okay. And then what do we want inside of here? First name will be John Doe. First name will be John. Last name will be Doe. Then absences will have 0. Tardies will have 0. And then is there anything else I missed? And then the grade, we'll give him a 89. He's pretty good. He's a pretty good student. And we don't need to set the ID because the database will just do that by itself. It's really cool. It'll automatically increment it. And yeah, I'll show you how that works later. And for now, I'm just going to go ahead and add a couple more students so we can get a nice sample size and see how it works. So I have all my students that I want to add right here, which is pretty cool. And at this point, the database should be created, but I will also be adding this just to make sure that it actually added the people, actually added the students to the list. And I want to make sure that this code actually executed properly. And then what I'll also add is I'll do console.writeLine, and then we'll write path, and then we'll do directory.get current directory so that we know where the database is stored. As you can see, this uses system.io, so make sure you implement that if you want to print this out, which you don't have to, but if you want to. And then I'm going to go back over here to database model because I actually did make a mistake about this. What you have to do, you have to remove this and just leave it like that. And I'm not sure why it doesn't work the other way. I know there's a way to work around it, but we're just not going to go over that in this video. Maybe I'll put a comment in the comment section in case you're interested in learning how to do that. Anyways, here we go. So we'll go back over here. We'll run our console application. And what we should be seeing is it should say add people here, and it should print out a path. Okay, great. So we have a path right here. So now we know exactly where everything should be, where the database should be. We'll take a look. We'll open the File Explorer. We'll go right here, paste it in. I'm just going to remove that N. And it should be somewhere in here. Now, the question is, can I find it? Here we are, right down here. I see students, database file, great. Not very useful to us right now because we can't open it. But what I do have is I have this handy dandy application right here called Database Browser for SQLite. And you can look it up and just download it, but I'll also leave a download link in the description of this video. And what you want to do is you want to open the database. You want to go to the path. Oops, my bad. Go to the path, and you'll see database file. You can now open it. Click open, and you'll see a couple things when you first open this. You'll see tables. There's two different tables that come pre-built. I mean, there's one table that comes pre-built with SQLite, and that's just this SQLite sequence. You don't have to worry about that. Then right here, we have the students. We can see the little key thing right there just means it's the primary key. Very cool. Automatically picked it. Right here, we can see all the data inside each student. And if we want to browse the data, we can click over here and look at that. How cool is that? Now, right here, we're able to see all of our students and we can see their grades. And I did accidentally generate them twice. That's okay though. You can see right here, John Doe, John Doe. There you go. I accidentally generated them twice. But that's okay. So here you go. We can see all of their unique IDs. And let's give deleting and editing a try, all right? So we'll take all of this out. And what we'll do is let's say we want to edit Maximus Max. I know, you don't have to tell me, my names are very creative. So first we'll want to access Maximus Max. So to do that, we'll get him by doing our handy dandy command that we made earlier using the database service to get a student. Right here, we see that we had it taken an ID. So we look at Maximus Max, and we see that his ID is 3. So we'll be able to access him with that ID. And now he should be set to this function. which is really cool. So we should be able to get all the information about him. Now let's say Max has been doing really good in school, and now he's doing even better. He has a 98% now. What we can do is we can modify his grade. Now set it to 98. Good job, Max. I'm proud of you. So now that we've accessed the student and then we've changed the grade, we haven't actually updated it. We've only updated student inside of this little main function right here. So if you recall, we actually created a command to save or to modify a student. And now that we've modified him here and we've updated his grade, we can simply do that. We hit run and we're just gonna say edited people. We'll run the application and then we'll wait for the thing to come up. Sorry, let's try that again. Wait for the thing to come up. Wait for it to say edited people. You can see it says edited people. Now let's take a look at our database. And you'll see right away the grade hasn't actually updated inside of the database. But that's just how the database browser works. You actually have to refresh the database. And then right here you can see Maximus Max, his grades have been updated. Now let's take a look at the last function we created. Let's just take this out. We also created the remove student function. So let's say Nicholas Jameson left the school, he moved. All right, well, let's take a look at his ID. Let's take a look at his ID here. We see that his ID is 7. So the way to access him is through the 7. If you recall, we had a function for this and we removed the student using an ID. His ID is 7. So there you go. And this is all we really need for this one. This one's very simple. Obviously, you can't really tell from code which one is Nicholas Jameson. Either way, that's okay. So now that we have the code to remove the student, we can just run the application and let's see. Let's wait for the console.write line to say deleted people. There you go, perfect. Close out of that. Once again, you have to refresh the database for the changes to actually show in the database browser. Boom. And there you go. Number 7, or ID number 7, Nicholas Jameson, is now gone. And as you'll see, there'll actually be a gap. I mean, once an ID has been taken, it can never be taken again, which is helpful because you always know that the student with the ID 14 will always be added before, will always have been added to the database before the students with a smaller ID. So you always know that if the ID is bigger than another one, it was added after. And that's useful, maybe not for this database, but for other databases. So you can see how this is really cool. You can see how I hope you can see how this might be useful in your other programs. Thank you so much for watching. I know this video wasn't great. It's one of my first. And next time I'll try to be more organized, a little bit less confusing. Next time, maybe we'll go over JSON or Discord bots. I have some big plans. And if you'd like, you can visit my Discord server and you can talk to me if you need help. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.